research in America to help America be better. This is seeming very difficult at the moment. A lot of my peers are going abroad for their postdocs. I also have friends in the neuroscience lab who've been fired from their labs. This is not mathematics, I guess, but in neuroscience, I guess, when you fire technicians for these labs, entire experiments will just completely fall apart because these people are doing very critical work by themselves. If you fire one, the entire project falls apart. So yeah, to end, maybe let me share one more story from Nazi Germany, which is, I'm not quite sure what field it's in, but maybe it's sociology. I don't remember the details of the story. Whether the story is true or not, I suppose doesn't matter as much. But the story goes like this. The Nazi, I guess, Minister of Education or whatever, sits down with a professor from some university, and he says to him, listen, we need you to fire all Jewish professors. We need you to do blah, 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 etc., etc., etc. At the end of this, the professor is silent for maybe 5 seconds or so, and he asks, what does this mean for our funding next year? I don't know, make of that what you will. So I think we need to, also be mindful of that. So let me stop there.
I think it's my turn now, right? You need to give me the.
Oh yes, of course.
Thank you.
I hope I haven't gone overtime.
Well, I don't think there's such a thing as overtime anymore. I mean, it is now it's 2:05, right? It's kind of the graveyard shift, and I'm happy to continue as long as others are willing to listen. I have your testimonials. Yeah, sure, take that. And statements that other people gave me they wanted me to read because they prefer to be anonymous. There are 2 such statements from doctoral students in the natural sciences, and there's also a statement by a tenured professor in the natural sciences.
Let's hear it for doctoral students.
Yes, thank you. I should have said, but you see, you're about to hear from 2 more doctoral students anonymously. Here's the first one. For the past month, my mental health has taken a nosedive. There is breaking news every morning I wake up. Someone was abducted by plainclothes ICE agents and sent to a foreign prison. An F1 student got their student status revoked without notification and had to flee the country in fear of deportation, or increasingly outrageous statements are coming out of social media posts by the president. As an international student, I feel especially helpless because, as plenty of evidence shows, the Trump administration and many of its affiliates believe that freedom of speech and due process rights are nothing but privileges of American citizenship. I'm not even sure I'm confident enough to ask the ICE agents knocking on my door for a judicial warrant. Even though I have not participated in any protest or become involved in politics, the lawless manner of these so-called enforcements makes me worry about what will happen next. The university has provided some resources for dealing with the uncertainty. However, they are not enough. Columbia's administration should be more proactive about student safety. Some of my friends, who are also PhD students, communicated to me that their institutions have said things like they can finish their studies elsewhere if their statuses are revoked unfairly. And I'd really appreciate something from the university along this line. For those listening and those participating in the Speak Out, I appreciate your attentiveness to our safety. Let us hope the situation will improve soon. Thank you. And here's the other, and the last statement from a graduate student. As we gather here to demand the right to free speech for students such as Mahmoud Khalil, it is important to echo what Mahmoud Khalil himself continues to echo from a detention center. There is a genocide, and specifically a scholasticide in Gaza, and it is our duty as students and academics to end it. The move to silence student voices and defund academia is because the truths that student protesters proclaim are seen as a threat by the American government that funds and seeks to profit from mass bombings, starvations, and imprisonment in Palestine. Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Maghdawi have risked their safety and their livelihoods to remind us all of this. And if we decide to only speak abstractly about academic freedom and freedom of speech without amplifying the voices of the Palestinian activists whose freedom of speech is being targeted, then the Trump administration's authoritarian campaign has already won their goal of total complicity during a genocide. Okay, well, that's it for the statements from graduate students. And I would echo what my colleague was just saying before. Thank you to all of you. What you said was very eloquent, and there were many different, diverse ideas and points of view that were put out, which I guess is what the Speak Out is for. So thank you so much. I would add that it's 10 minutes after 2 in the morning, and so anyone who wishes is certainly free to leave. I have a lot more material, and I could continue, but I guess the
Keep going. Keep going.
right the 2 a.m. slot may belong to someone else. If you want to stick around, that's wonderful. Okay. As I said, I have a statement written by a tenured member of the natural sciences faculty who prefers to remain anonymous. Sorry, keep dropping. Okay. President Trump's press conference a few weeks ago with Salvadorian President Nayib Bukele contains a segment that vividly illustrates what it means to live in a post-truth regime. The response to a question by CNN reporter Caitlin Collins, "Do you plan to ask President Bukele to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly deported?" The statement lasts more than 6 excruciating minutes, but I encourage everyone to watch it in full, because the successive answers by Attorney General Pam Bondi, Stephen Miller, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, as well as Trump and Bukele themselves, provide a remarkably efficient demonstration of the tactic of the big lie. The finely choreographed comments by Bondi, Miller, and the others confirmed one another so effortlessly that those who do not know better could easily have believed that Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man deported to brutal Salvadoran prison, had in fact been found by a US court, by 2 courts in fact, to be a member of the barbaric MS-13 gang and thus a terrorist, and thus with no right to be in the US at all, and that the US Supreme Court unanimously agrees with this. CNN senior reporter Daniel Dale, who does know better, demolished Miller's account point by point in a 4-minute segment. By itself, such a fact-based analysis would have little chance of competing with a coordinated campaign of distortion, such as the one seen during the press conference. But fortunately, a popular movement has emerged to protest the illegal abduction, deportation, and imprisonment. And several political leaders, notably Senator Chris Van Hollen from Abrego Garcia's home state of Maryland, have put their prestige on the line to demand Abrego Garcia's release. The Columbia students threatened with deportation, Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Makhdawi, who have been detained, as well as others who are fighting detention or who have gone into hiding, have also been subjected to the big lie. Officials of the Trump administration and its supporters in the press, in Congress, and online have repeated the charge that Khalil has participated in anti-Semitic protests and disruptive activities and has provided support to Hamas terrorism, while Makhdawi has been accused of engaging in threatening rhetoric and intimidation of pro-Israeli bystanders. It is easy to find press accounts pointing out that these claims are unsubstantiated, that none of the Columbia students has been charged with a crime. But their first line of defense, occupying a role analogous to Senator Van Hollen's, should naturally be Columbia's administration, which has remained silent. This silence is easier to understand when we realize that much of the language used to attack the Columbia student activists has been borrowed verbatim from Columbia's leadership. The expression threatening rhetoric and intimidation was lifted directly from Columbia Senior Executive Vice President Jerry Rosberg's characterization of demonstrations by Columbia SJP and JVP when he announced their suspension. And when House Education and Workforce Committee Chairman Tim Walberg calls on Columbia to combat its rampant anti-Semitism, 2 words that have been used to discredit Columbia for more than a year, he is doing no more than quoting acting President Claire Shipman's congressional testimony last year. She said, "We have a specific problem right now on our campus, so I can speak from what I know, and that is rampant anti-Semitism." The claim that Columbia suffers from rampant anti-Semitism, as opposed to scattered incidents of anti-Semitism alongside intense protest of Israel's actions, does not stand up to scrutiny, which is why it hasn't been scrutinized. The best piece of evidence that anti-Semitism isn't rampant is that, with 3 exceptions, which are named in a footnote, no one has been disciplined for explicitly anti-Semitic actions. Evidence-based reasoning has no bearing, of course, on post-truth discourse, but for the natural sciences hour, it feels appropriate. The second best piece of evidence is that media claims of rampant anti-Semitism at Columbia have been accompanied by the repeated and exclusive citation of these 3 incidents, along with a handful of others, most of which took place off campus beyond Columbia's gates. The third best piece of evidence is the absence of any indication whatsoever, either in the anti-Semitism report or in congressional hearings or in the media, that anti-Semitism was rampant or blatant or latent or in any way an issue at Columbia before October 2023. Nevertheless, and in large part thanks to statements by Columbia's top administration, Columbia's reputation as a dangerous place for Jews has been seared into the public image of the university and the image of universities generally. This is bad enough, but it's not the most serious consequence of Columbia's acquiescence to the big lie. Someday, Khalil and Mahdawi will be freed from their detention, and someday Columbia students will no longer have to fear for the loss of their freedom. We can hope that this will happen soon. We can even hope that Columbia's officials will have at least apologized to them for having devised the rhetoric and created the preconditions for their persecution. But it will take more than apologies to undo the damage to Columbia's credibility as a center of critical thinking created by the university's continued commitment to a narrative that is manifestly false. Ideas necessary for a critical understanding of events in the Middle East have been ruled off limits as ostensibly anti-Semitic in the interest of subjecting the field to a post-truth regime. Similar efforts are underway around race, gender, and climate. In the glossary of the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the entry on dissociation explains that dissociation may allow the individual to maintain allegiance to 2 contradictory truths while remaining unconscious of the contradiction. Doublethink, on the other hand, is George Orwell's name for the obligation to maintain allegiance to 2 contradictory truths while remaining conscious of the contradiction. Such an obligation is psychologically uncomfortable in the extreme, especially when the obligation extends to our interactions with students. It is also clearly incompatible with scholarly practice. What then does Columbia's leadership think it is preserving by failing to challenge the rampant anti-Semitism narrative that it did so much itself to establish? A powerful statement, which I want to reiterate. I'm reading on behalf of a colleague, a tenured colleague in the natural sciences who, oh, that's much better, thank you. A tenured colleague in the natural sciences who passed it along to me. The only remaining statement that I have to read is I was going to talk myself in my own voice, but I have not prepared a text, unlike most of the speakers who did so very heroically at the last minute. I wanted to talk a little bit about freedom of speech as a general phenomenon, because as you may know, besides being professor of mathematics, I also serve now as the vice president of the Columbia chapter of the American Association of University Professors, which is an advocacy group that advocates on behalf of university faculty. And in that capacity, we're called upon to defend our colleagues' rights to free expression all the time when they're criticized for saying something controversial. Um, One thing that people don't understand is that in that position, we're called upon all the time to defend people for saying things that we loathe. We don't always approve of or appreciate or agree with the speech acts that we have to defend. And it can be pretty uncomfortable because most of the time, the assumption by those listening to us is that we do agree with what was said, and that's why we're defending it. It's very hard for people to understand, apparently, that it's possible to defend the rights to free speech of people whom you disagree with very strongly. And often the ones who are put in the position of mounting that kind of defense, they start off by saying, well, I disagree with what this person has to say, but, and then the person who is being defended often complains and objects to that. They say, do you really, every time you defend me, do you have to point out that you also disagree with what I have to say? But the fact is, we sort of do have to do that because otherwise the two positions would tend to be conflated. There's always a tendency to assume that when someone is defending someone else's speech, that he or she agrees with it. Because I take positions like this, I'm often referred to by my colleagues as a free speech absolutist. I'm not a free speech absolutist, and I think almost no one actually is a free speech absolutist. Like almost all fundamental rights, there are limits to them, especially when they come into conflict with other rights. There was a famous line from a Supreme Court opinion, which I have on one of these other cards. Well, thank you. Hang on, I'm not finished. I'm just trying to find the. I'm just trying to find the quotation that I want to make. Well, I have plenty of light. Yes, I just have too many of these cards. I have all the text that other people were reading.
I know. Give us.
All right, sorry. It's all right. I can't find my notes. But anyway, the quotation that I was searching for is one that you would almost recognize from memory. It's from a decision in the over 100 years ago by Oliver Wendell Holmes. He said, "No interpretation of free speech will protect a man shouting fire and causing a panic in a theater." So nobody really believes that free speech rights are absolute. Um, Nevertheless, in the United States, freedom of speech is a constitutional right. The First Amendment to the Constitution says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of people to peaceably to assemble, which is what we're doing right now. It doesn't say that you have absolute freedom to do that. It just says that Congress is not supposed to make laws abridging your freedom to do that. And since the First Amendment was enacted, legal doctrine has grown up called incorporation, which holds that other branches of the government also do not have the right to abridge your freedom of speech rights. The New York State legislature, for example, cannot make laws abridging our rights of free speech. But it doesn't say that one private actor cannot abridge another one's free speech. Your employer does have the right to abridge your free speech. Employers can and do fire their employees for their political speech on or off the job, in or out of the workplace. There are some laws protecting political speech by employees of private companies, but it's a patchwork. It's not the broad protection that's extended by the Constitution. We at an institution like Columbia, a prestigious and research university, believe that the university would respect our rights to free speech. And academic freedom certainly has a lot to do that. Academic freedom carries some expectation that that employees of the university are free to speak out not only about their own subject matter, but on a wide range of subjects. Academic freedom is not the same as freedom of speech. Academic freedom is a more localized phenomenon. And since the AAUP was founded over a century ago, there's been a great deal of debate about what academic freedom actually does mean or should mean. it was originally understood to refer to some kind of privilege of professors, uh, the right to pursue their research and to teach their classes in the way they saw fit without interference or retaliation from their administration. But nowadays, it has to be understood in a broader sense, I think, for a number of reasons. Um, uh, First of all, uh, the uh, classical form of academic freedom applied only to faculty, but it's clear that students often need to be protected by the principles of academic freedom, especially when they're acting in an instructional capacity, like the graduate students around me. But if you remember, there was an incident in June of last year when the Columbia Law Review had its website shut down by the board of directors because the student editors of that law review had published an article entitled "Towards Nakba as a Legal Concept." So this is a case in which the students at the Columbia Law School were acting in an editorial capacity, and they, of course, deserve to benefit from academic freedom as well. Um, Also, academic freedom had been thought to apply to the subject matter of that we teach and research only. Whereas, as I said, I think at a great university like ours, it should be understood that our political speech also deserves some zone of protection from retaliation, not only by our institution, but also by the government. And I guess this brings me to the broadest point: is that academic freedom was thought to protect faculty from retaliation by the institution, but it's now clear that a much greater danger is the threat of retaliation or punishment or sanction by our government, which would be exerted through university administration. Um, so the returning to freedom of speech more broadly, I guess. The main point I want to make about that is that freedom of speech, unlike other freedoms, requires something of other people besides the speaker. The freedom of speech necessarily entails a freedom to be heard. Freedom of speech means nothing if speech is only permitted to occur in a vacuum without anyone else hearing them. Another Orwell quotation, which is from the preface that he wrote to Animal Farm, and this one I could find back here. Orwell said, "If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear." So there has to be some right to be heard. Um, I'm old enough to remember the 2004 Republican National Convention in New York when many of us were protesting against the Iraq War. The city tried to herd us into a large protest zone on 10th or 11th Avenue, far away from Madison Square Garden, where the convention was taking place, far away from the press, far away from passersby and onlookers. There was simply no point to having a demonstration there where no one at all was going to witness it. Luckily, now we're on a live stream, and so even though only a few people are here, potentially we could be seen all around the world. Um, those were the days in the early years of the 21st century when the infamous concept of the free speech zone was created, a tiny pen into which protesters at universities would be herded so that universities would be free from protest activity. And we have to send the message that that's just unacceptable, that the point of protest is to be heard, and to be heard in particular by people who don't want to hear them and can be somewhat offended by what we have to say. There's a danger that harassment and anti-harassment law could be used to suppress free speech. I always think of this connection about the episode in 2010 when Jenny Thomas, the wife of the Supreme Court Justice, called up Anita Hill on her office telephone at Brandeis University and left her a voicemail message asking her to apologize for accusing her husband of sexual harassment. Anita Hill then immediately reported this voicemail to the campus police, which was a little bit thin-skinned, I think, after one voicemail message. But what if Ginny Thomas had called her 3 times or 8 times? You know, at what point would it cross over the line from free speech to harassment? We need to worry about that, and it's a gray area where, on the one hand, there are, of course, legitimate claims about harassment, but on the other hand, there are real dangers that anti-harassment and anti-bullying laws or ordinances can be used to shut down legitimate speech rights. I guess the last thing I would say, I've kept you here for a while, and I'm pleased to see that the audience has actually grown in the last few minutes, is that freedom of speech has to include the freedom to say all kinds of very unsavory things. Coming back, I guess, to what I mentioned at the beginning, it has to include the freedom to tell lies. It has to include the freedom to advocate violence. That's not because I approve of lying. That's not because I approve of advocating violence. It's because when you think about what the alternative is that the government would have to determine what is a lie and what's not, or what constitutes advocating violence and what's not. And that's extremely dangerous. The Supreme Court has held in Brandenburg versus Ohio in the 1960s that advocating violence is covered by the First Amendment. And that's very important. If you think about it, even in our university community, there are very distinguished Columbia professors, whom I won't name, who have given, well, there's one specific distinguished professor who gave an interview to a prominent journalist praising Sweden for sending lethal weapons to Ukraine. Well, when he praised Sweden for sending lethal weapons to Ukraine, presumably he intends Ukraine to use these lethal weapons in a lethal fashion. So is he advocating violence? In a sense, yes, he is. And you know, this is not such a hypothetical example anymore, because it's pretty clear what our federal administration thinks about the war in Ukraine. It's pretty clear which side they're on. And they really might try to start sanctioning people for advocating violence in that way. Of course, the Ukraine war, like the Yugoslavian war before it, is one that poses a quandary for those of us who think that we're anti-war, or those of us who claim to be anti-war. But the dangers of restricting speech rights in a way, such a way as to criminalize advocating violence is very dangerous. It's saying that only certain kinds of state-sponsored violence will be deemed acceptable, and that's something we should be able to discuss at a great university. And that connection, it troubles me, although I think I was the only one who was troubled by it, that repeated statements by our university administration say that advocating violence is unacceptable in the Columbia community. They don't really mean that. They mean that we're only allowed to advocate certain kinds of violence in certain ways. We're allowed to advocate for the state to have a monopoly on violence. Again, that's quite dangerous. If we believe in free speech, we really have to embrace free speech in a maximal sense. And once again, speech rights are not absolute. That doesn't mean that anyone at Columbia or elsewhere should be advocating for imminent violence or inciting violence. But it's very different from the conception of free speech as it has been embraced by the Supreme Court, and frankly, as it's been understood in American society for a couple of centuries. I come back to the quotation with which I started off well over an hour ago, and which I want to leave you with, which is Orwell saying, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 makes 4." I'm of two minds about that statement. I think what I've been trying to explain to you is that I think that freedom of speech, at least, is actually very complicated, and that lines have to be drawn. The line should be drawn in a very liberal and tolerant way. But I myself am not exactly sure where those lines should be drawn. And I do think that an institution like Columbia is where we should be having a lively and robust debate about these things. Thank you. who's taking over?
All right.
I'm finally
Great
handing
to
over.
hear from social work.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
There. Thank you so much. Let's hear it for Professor Thaddeus and
Yes.
all the amazing doctoral students.
Thank you.
Another
Thank you, Natural
important
Sciences.
lesson on free speech.
And it's so gratifying to see the students at both undergraduates and graduates. Thank you. It's as a professor here, it's amazing to see the next generation speaking out, speaking up, speaking loud, speaking proud, and fighting the fight.
Great.
So we're going to keep continuing here in the next hour. Thank you for staying with us in this hour. Just one quick reminder why we are here. We're here to call on the trustees and the Columbia Board to, one, stand up for higher education, two, fight back against federal attacks, three, protect and defend students and international scholars, four, preserve academic freedom, freedom of expression, and Columbia University's autonomy to govern these. Five, to reestablish and affirm the tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And six, protect our researchers and provide backup funding. Now, to go into a little bit more specifics and to fill a little bit of time, let me explain a little bit more about what each of these are. So one, stand up for higher ed. We call on the Board of Trustees and the President of Columbia University to formally propose and help establish a mutual academic defense compact among all members of the Association of American Universities, AAUS. This request is rooted in the basic principles of defense of academic freedom, institutional integrity, and the research enterprise. What do we mean when we say fight back against federal attacks? We call on the board to deploy every legal means to challenge the federal government's termination or threatened termination of grants to Columbia, including cutting the indirect cost rates. Rather than engaging in anticipatory obedience with the federal government's political demands, we expect Columbia to aggressively defend our academic mission, including challenging federal actions taken against Columbia that violate values of free speech and academic freedom.
Yeah.
Number three, protect and defend students and international scholars. We call on the board to initiate and join existing legal actions against federal government's egregious rights violations, including detention and attempted deportation by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and visa cancellations by federal agencies. We call on the university to provide legal assistance to those affected, affirm the legal presumption of innocence, and condemn attacks on international students and scholars.
Yes. Protect our students.
Four, preserving academic freedom, freedom of expression, and Columbia University's autonomy to govern these. The commitment to these principles has been fundamental to the success of American research universities being the best in the world. We call on the board to affirm that reviews of academic programs, personnel decisions about individual faculty, and student disciplinary cases will never be dictated by political pressures or threats to withhold funding. What do we mean when we talk about reestablish and affirm tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion? That is, Columbia is made stronger by its diversity. It remains excellent because of its inclusivity and lives up to its values through inclusiveness. We call on the board to affirm that these will remain central values for the institution and that such values not need be disavowed in the face of political pressure. We also are calling on the board to protect our researchers and provide backup funding. We call on the board and university leadership to commit to providing backup funding for all improperly terminated federal research funds that were awarded to Columbia investigators. The research faculty, clinical, and technical staff affected by these terminations are not to blame for their loss. And indeed, in securing these research funds, They both fulfilled the university's expectations of them and met with approval in rigorous competitive processes of peer review. The board's strategy of negotiation and concessions up to this point has failed to protect them. We call on leadership to take financial responsibility to protect these research studies, training programs, and personnel until such time a more effective defense has been mounted and the original funds have been recovered. So at the School of Social Work, I'm going to read some testimonials from some of my colleagues.
Woohoo! Yes.
As we work through some technical. Okay. So this is a testimonial from one of our BIPOC adjunct faculty. So, as a longtime adjunct at CSSW, the Columbia School of Social Work, and as a BIPOC faculty member who began teaching at CSSW when the majority of the faculty were white, I am saddened and scared to see the direction that this school is headed. At its core, social work's focus and tenets are based within and upon discussing and confronting the foundational structures of power, oppression, societal equity, racial diversity, cultural humility, person and environment, and centering the individual and his, her, their life circumstances within these concepts. For Columbia University to bow to the Trump administration and its demands is the integrity of our social work profession and our teaching at CSSW. How can we teach about mass incarceration without speaking of the influence of historical anti-Black racism, slavery, and the prevalence of disproportionality? How can we teach about immigrant populations without teaching about anti-immigrant sentiment in this country and push and pull factors when discussing migration and immigration? Ignoring these critical things ignores the fundamental bedrock of principles our profession is built upon. To teach anything else is to fail to uphold our social work ethics. Columbia University's bowing to the Trump administration has created fear among unprotected adjunct faculty. How can we stay true to our profession and teach the fundamental tenets of social work without fear that speaking about our profession and teaching it, as we have done for years till now, will result in censorship by the university or harm by the public or government? Should we fear having our syllabi published for fear the articles and ideas clash with Trump advances desire for education and idea to reflect their beliefs?
No.
Should we fear recording our lectures or sharing our PowerPoint slides? This is the current state of affairs for adjuncts at Columbia School of Social Work due to Columbia University's failure to stand up to the Trump administration and protect our academic integrity and free thinking education. CU must stand up to the Trump administration and listen to the faculty and students. Education, honest education, is about expanding one's mind through new ideas and discourse, which can and may often be uncomfortable. It is about critical thinking and exposure to different ways of thought. Only then can students be critical thinkers and clarify their own values. No one is telling students what to think. We're helping them to learn how to be critical thinkers and to go out into the world and to be able to weigh fact from fiction. Preach. Columbia University must return to its respected reputation as a place for uncensored discourse, learning, and inquiry. Columbia University must listen to the people on the ground doing the work, faculty, TAs, staff, and students who learn from them. Your responsibility is to us, not the pathetic, racist, small-minded administration. The Columbia School of Social Work also must protect its adjuncts and professors by taking a written public stance so we can teach our profession and stay true to our social work ethics. Thank you. How are we? All right.
Here for social workers.
We have a geneticist tenured professor from the med school who will really talk whatever you want.
Okay. like soon. So here's a piece that I wrote. And it's actually in contrast to the youth that were here, the young undergraduates. It's more speaking from my generation. I'm pretty solidly Generation X. And so here's a letter I'm writing to the Board of Trustees. I'm asking to the Board of Trustees, let's reminisce together. So I don't have all or perhaps any of the solutions to how the university should deal with student protests and concerns that the university administration is acquiescent to a government intent on suppressing dissent, free speech, and academic freedom. But recent events have made one thing crystal clear: the current decision makers are the Board of Trustees. So what can I offer to you, the board, many of whom I infer are of my generation or older, and not those young students that we saw earlier? So I'm going to offer a moment to reminisce about an enduring memory from my younger years, maybe our younger years. And that's the 1989 student-led protest in Tiananmen Square in Beijing, China. The media portrayal was of students rising up with extraordinary courage, calling for a future rooted in democracy, liberty, and justice. The Chinese government's response was brutally clear: conformity, obedience. Now, one of my most vivid and famous images of the Tiananmen Square protest was a picture of, quote unquote, the Tank Man. For those of you who don't know Tank Man, go to Wikipedia or just do your Google search, look up Tank Man. And what you'll see is something burned into my memory. It's a solitary figure, dressed in humble clothes, carrying shopping bags, looks not unlike me, stepping into the path of a column of military tanks sent by the government to crush the protest. This Tank Man, with a little bit deft maneuvering of, I'm going to say maybe 150 pound or 68 kilogram body, was able to continually stymie the progress of 36 tons of military might. So I offer this memory and ask you, the Board of Trustees, when you kind of reminisce, go back, think about the Tank Man at the time. When you saw the Tank Man, did you cheer for the person standing up for democracy, free speech, and student protest? Or did you root for the tank to literally and figuratively crush protest with the might of armor and the force of authoritarian rule? So when you imagine standing up for what you believe in, who did you see yourself as? The one wielding shopping bags for peace, or the one with a hand on the throttle of a war machine? Now, I can only speak for myself. Back then and now, I aspired to the conviction, courage, and moral clarity of Tank Man. I ask each of you to share what Tank Man evokes in you and where that leaves you now. All right, I'm going to do one more, and then we can do the genesis. So I was trying to inspire you. I think both as an alumnus of Columbia and an alumnus of Harvard, I was inspired by the Harvard letter. So I'm going to read the Harvard letter for inspiration. So, dear Messrs. Greenbaum, Cavendish, and Wheeler, we represent Harvard University. We are writing in response to your letter dated April 11, 2025, addressed to Dr. Alan Garber, Harvard's president, and Penny Pritzker, senior fellow of the Harvard Corporation. Harvard is committed to fighting anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry in its community. Anti-Semitism and discrimination of any kind are not only abhorrent and antithetical to Harvard's values, but also threaten its academic mission. To that end, Harvard has made and will continue to make lasting and robust structural, policy, and programmatic changes to ensure that the university is a welcoming and supportive learning environment for all students and continues to abide in all respects with federal law across its academic programs and operations, while fostering open inquiry in a pluralistic community free from intimidation and open to challenging orthodoxies, whatever their source. So over the past 15 years, Harvard has undertaken substantial policy and programmatic measures. It has made changes to its campus use policies, adopted new accountability procedures, imposed meaningful discipline for those who violate university policies, enhance programs designed to address bias and promote ideological diversity and civil discourse, hired staff to support these programs and support students, change partnerships, dedicated resources to combat hate and bias, and enhance safety and security measures. As a result, Harvard is in a very different place today from where it was a year ago. These efforts and additional measures the university will be taking against anti-Semitism not only are the right thing to do, but are also critical to strengthening Harvard's community as a place where everyone can thrive. It is unfortunate then that your letter disregards Harvard's efforts and instead presents demands that, in contravention of the First Amendment, invades universities' freedoms long recognized by the Supreme Court. The government's terms also circumvent Harvard's statutory rights by requiring unsupported and disruptive remedies for alleged harms that the government has not proven through mandatory processes established by Congress and required by law. No less objectionable is the condition, first made explicit in the letter of March 31st, 2025, that Harvard accede to these terms or risk the loss of billions of dollars in federal funding critical to vital research and innovations that have saved and improved lives and allowed Harvard to play a central role in rethinking in making our country's scientific, medical, and other research communities the standard bearers for the world. These demands extend not only to Harvard, but to separately incorporated and independently operated medical and research hospitals engaging in life-saving work on behalf of their patients. The university will not surrender its independence nor relinquish its constitutional rights. Neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government. Accordingly, Harvard will not accept the government's terms as an agreement in principle. Harvard remains open to dialogue about what the university has done and is planning to do to improve the experience of every member of the community. But Harvard is not prepared to agree to demands that go beyond the lawful authority of this or any administration. Signed, the lawyers for Harvard University.
Nice.
So I hope we take inspiration. I hope this university continues to take inspiration. And we will persevere. We will stand up for our rights. We will stand up for higher education.
Yes.
So we have someone from the Department of Genetics
Yes.
who is willing to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Please introduce yourself too. I
Get
apologize.
the dongle on you. Control with that. It's not that. It's a lanyard. Okay.
It's a
If
lanyard.
you want to be on the live stream, you can step right up there.
No,
No?
thank
Okay.
I'm Mimi. I'm a tenured professor
No, she doesn't want to be on.
in the light.
Oh, come over here.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. No, it's okay. I'm a tenured professor in the Department of Genetics and Development at the medical school. Bit unscripted here, but we want to keep this going, right?
Yes.
Let's keep it going. Speak out. I'll tell a story. I'll tell the story of my grandparents, who are wonderful people who came to this country looking for a better life and who were imprisoned in a Japanese internment camp for 3 years. They were separated. My grandmother went in pregnant with 2 children. So she had her third child in the camps. And they came out. They were imprisoned because of the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, the same act that is now being used to deport immigrants without due process. It was a mistake then.
Yeah.
It's a mistake now.
Yes.
We must learn from history.
Yes.
What are we doing? Why are we doing the same mistakes over and over again? There's no point. It's such a pointless thing to do. Anyway, my grandparents came to this country to contribute to this country, to make it a better place. Immigrants made this country a better place. If you think about it, we're all immigrants.
Absolutely.
100%. All of my colleagues at the medical school want to contribute to this country. That's all they want. Every single one of them is involved in finding truth, in discovering biological mechanisms, in finding cures. They want to help people. And it is to some extent our fault that we don't reach out enough to the public to let them know how important research is, how important education is, how important these opportunities are for all of us, for our children, for the country's children. We have students from all over, from Arkansas, from China, from Japan, from India, from the entire world, really, all at the medical school, getting trained in how to be a scientist and how to think critically, how to discover truth, how to uncover biological mechanisms, identify cures for disease. That's the mission that we have. We haven't made it clear to the public how important federal funding is for that mission and how that mission helps people, helps the country. I've been workshopping this idea. I know that we had this discussion earlier, which I really loved actually, about how the country should be seen, or the university should be seen, not as a commodity, but as a community. At the same time, I do see that the public asked Trump to do this, right? This is to some extent the will of the voters who voted for him, his base. And in part, it's because we haven't done a good enough job of telling them that the university is just as important as the military. It keeps us safe. It trains our young. It prepares us for the worst case scenarios, and it innovates and creates technology that everybody can use, right? Yeah. For that reason, universities, medical centers, research centers are all over the country, right? Just the same as military bases. Military is not expected to have a specific product, right? It's the same. It's the same with education and with science, right? With research of any kind. In fact, it's training, it's education, it's producing safety for our country, in fact, right? We are safer, stronger, and more prosperous because of education and universities and research. We need to workshop this idea. We need to get this out to the public and tell people that we are for them, right? We're not isolated. We have been isolated. We shouldn't be isolated. We need to reach out more and let people know what these opportunities are for them and for their kids, right? I recently got together with some friends from graduate school, and we had a little reunion. There were 9 of us. We're all women, and we reflected a lot in that weekend on the opportunities that we'd all had, from public school to college education, graduate school, federal funding for research. We were doctors, epidemiologists, professors, heads of labs. We all want to contribute to our country. We're all here to make America what it is. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. But I do think if we could just tell people what we're about as a university, that we are protecting their rights, that we're increasing the dialogue for them. We are them. They are us. The attack on our most vulnerable, it's a way of dividing us, making us focus on things that are not the problem, right? If we protect the vulnerable, those who have least voice, it makes all of us stronger. It's been a really dark time for so many of us since the election. Even at the time, I remember I took my family canvassing in Philadelphia many weekends before the election, and the fear was palpable amongst the people that we talked to on both sides, really. It wasn't on just one side. And I understand that the board is afraid, right? They're afraid that they'll lose what we have. But I would say if they don't stand up, we'll lose it anyway. And what will we have left? Nothing. So we might as well stand up, right? Go for it. Take the risk. Be like Tank Man,
Yes.
right? Because otherwise, what are we? Where are we? Who are we? Right? We need to do it. So let's keep standing up.
Woo! Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Get the lanyards
Oh, yeah.
out.
Oh, it's cold.
I'm just gonna.
Oh,
Yeah. So now we have Yannick Team, who is from the Humanities and the Religion Department, who is going to keep us going for a little bit, right? So please give it up for Yannick.
All right. How is this? Wait. Okay. And oh, not used to the microphone. Yeah, this right. Ah, okay. Well, good morning, New York, and everywhere else in the world. This is the Columbia I love to come out for. I know some people are wondering why do a 24, 25, 26 hour speak out? What's the point? Isn't it just nice theater? Does it do anything? Now, if the question here is, where's the rest of Columbia? Where's our board of trustees? Where are all the schools, all the universities? Why isn't there a constant speaking out? Then, yeah, I agree. How can it be that we are still doing business as usual? It is not normal when a government ships people to prison gulags. It is not normal when a government refuses to be bound by law and starts arresting judges, as we've seen in Wisconsin. It is not normal when a government kidnaps our students for their political speech. And it is not normal when a government issues ransom notes to its universities. It is normal about this moment, and this is not why my lovely papers.
That's exactly what the moment was.
This it is not normal. I don't even know the order. So this is now the randomizer.
All right. So do you want to take a second and we can read poetry while you get it together? We love you. Thank you so much. Here, give me the mic.
Yeah.
And
You should say
hey,
a poem.
so we are going to. We just had a small technical problem. Paper based, and that's when you drop all the papers and it's working. So, all right. Anybody watching us? Yeah. We are. Really? Hey. What time is it? It's I just turned the mic off. No, I didn't. It's 2 a.m., 3 a.m. What time is it?
Do you want to take a moment? Sit down.
Yeah, and we can read a testimonial from
You should
one of our
read it.
colleagues.
I need a.
Here, I'll read Louise's. I'm going to read a testimonial from, actually, I have it right here. Look at us walking around like we're some kind of a stage. I have the mic. I got the, oh, wait, the live
Oh, no.
stream. Where's the live stream mic? right, here we go. Oh, you can just hold it here. It's 3 a.m. What are we doing? Woohoo! All right. Okay, so this is testimony from Professor Louisa Gilbert, who is a tenured full professor at the Columbia School of Social Work. Louisa writes, "Welcome, dear colleagues, friends, and community partners. I am sorry I'm not there with you today, but I cheer you on in spirit. My name is Louisa Gilbert. I've been at Columbia for over 45 years, first as a Barnard student, then as a master's student at the School of Social Work. I started working at Columbia in 1989 at the Social Intervention Group at the School of Social Work, and later did my PhD and joined the school faculty. I no longer recognize the institution I once loved and committed my life's work to, becoming an institution that has lost its moral compass and mission. By capitulating to Trump's demands, the Board of Trustees and former trustee President Shipman have compromised our academic freedom and failed to protect and defend our students, research, and teaching. The Board of Trustees and President have also taken action over the past decade to weaken mechanisms of shared faculty governance. Acting President Shipman's email sent on April 18th, threatening to restructure or more likely dismantle the Faculty Senate, is the latest assault on an essential mechanism of faculty governance, effectively enabling the Board of Trustees and President to make decisions without any checks and balances from the faculty. Acting President Shipman claimed that the reason for the restructuring, quote unquote, was that the Senate was ineffective and not representative of the faculty. Unlike the Board of Trustees, which is not representative of the interests of the faculty or wider Columbia community, members of the Faculty Senate are elected from each school. The Board of Trustees and President's action to put the South Asian Studies, African Studies, and Middle Eastern Studies under receivership also threatens how and what we teach, who gets hired, promoted, or fired, and what research is supported. And it is also a complete assault on our values as a university. Will the School of Social Work be next for receivership? ICE's actions of abducting and arresting Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Mardawi and detaining Yun Seo Chung are absolutely horrifying for all of our students who speak out for basic human rights of Palestinians to life and liberty. Oh, sorry. Keeping going, keeping going. Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. Okay. Anti-Semitism exists on Columbia's campus. It is important to note, however, that Columbia has not been found to have any Title VI violations in handling any incidents, according to Felice Rosen, CU's general counsel, who mentioned this on the research call after our NIH grants were frozen. Columbia has revoked degrees, expelled students, and fired faculty and staff for anti-Semitism. What more punitive actions can it take? I don't believe removing faculty governance and bringing departments under receivership will help combat anti-Semitism. Facilitating meaningful dialogues, raising awareness, and restorative justice approaches are what is needed to heal our campus from anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Black racism, and other forms of hatreds that exist on campus. This will be the first set of more demands from the Trump administration that we can expect to come that will surely threaten our university and our School of Social Work. Will our students and faculty be safe in carrying out our mission of social justice? Will students and faculty be safe expressing their ideas and engaging in classroom debates? Will faculty be able to research critical social justice issues? Will prospective students want to come to Columbia? Will our community partners want to continue to collaborate with us? So much is at risk at Columbia right now. The world will be watching closely to see how we respond and how we will be remembered at this critical point in our history.
What will our grandchildren and future great-great-grandchildren of our beloved community say about what we as faculty, staff, and students did to stand up and fight back? Let's keep on standing up and fighting back until we bring back our university to a point where we can call it home again. I want to give a big shout out of thanks to the event's organizers. We are still here, and all of you who have participated in this 25-hour speak out. Woohoo! That was Dr. Louisa Gilbert of the Columbia University School of Social Work. All right, and I think we're going to have Dr. Wu maybe read us a poem while waiting for a reassembly. Are you ready? Okay, all right.
You were spared the poem.
Until the next moment.
Yes. Why don't I hold the? I can hold the.
Clip.
I'll use it.
Yeah. I can also hold them.
Yeah, we have lots of ways of assisting.
Yeah.
Feels like anything. This is like a music stand, right? Oh, brought the
I
music
nearly failed 5th grade because I couldn't sing.
Oh no!
The teacher said if you always do the math part, you'll be fine.
Okay, well, sometimes all you need is a little math. Sometimes what you need is to be able to sing. You want me to clip it there? Or like just clip all the papers together? I'm afraid it's gonna fall.
Yeah, no, I'm.
Okay, we're still live because I'm talking into the mic. Like, all right, here we go. Woohoo! Thank you, thank you. All right.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone to our colleagues for organizing, also to the students for the amazing speeches. If we could only take credit that this is indoctrination, I wish we could take that credit. It has been amazing to learn so much from everyone. So why are we out here? Well, because it is not normal, and we need to break with business as usual. It is not possible to remain a university in more than name when academic freedom and the institutional integrity structurally but also materially, intellectually are not defended vigorously. When I grew up, where I grew up, we call what is happening, this kind of bartering with a repressive regime, we call that appeasement. And it's not a good thing. I grew up in Germany, about 30 minutes away from the former border to East Germany, and since by now it's about 3 hours and some, April 29th. So first of all, happy birthday to Duke Ellington, our local hero. Yeah, but also on this day in 1990, the dismantling of the Berlin Wall started. And that's one of the formative experiences for me. So I was 12 years old when the Monday demonstrations in East Germany began. And similar to the Tiananmen Square, it was remarkable to be, yes, just on the side, the west side of the wall, but to experience and see and wait and hope and finally see that when people turn out consistently and refuse to go away and refuse to continue to support a repressive regime, that regime too can be toppled. And yeah. So, but of course, in Germany, we're also very aware that the fall of the wall, the night of November 9th to 10th in 1989, was also the 51-year anniversary of the Nazi pogroms in 1938, where Jewish shops and synagogues burned, euphemistically also called the Weißkristallnacht, Weißkristall night. And that is the other formative background for me, which in some ways is probably even more present, namely Germany's relatively recent Nazi past. And the questions that animated really my friends while we were in school in university, and to this day I carry with me: how did the Nazis come to power? How could it happen? And we not always kindly asked every single adult in our families, teachers, professors who were remotely near a teenage adult age, what did you know when? What did you do? And why? Why did you not do more, especially before the power was actually consolidated? And third, the question of my nightmares honestly has always been, when the time comes, will I have the courage to show up, to speak up, to show my face? Or will I keep silent until it is too late and it is far more costly to speak out? I know there are debates over, is this fascism or not, and definitions and so on. I actually think that's a distraction at this moment. And because, of course, there are differences. We are not in 1920s Italy. This is not 1930s Germany. Um, and also, fascism is not foreign to the US, as Robert Paxton demonstrated very nicely. Of course, the US segregation and reservation system was a model for Nazi Germany. And let's also think about how we're talking here about the global circulation of fascisms, because then during the Nazi reign, we had the apartheid Afrikaner actually study with Germans. We also had contacts of India's BJP with the Nazis. And if we're looking right now, not just to Modi's regime, but also actually to who is in the background of the Trump and Vance regime, Vance was handpicked by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Mark Andreessen, big tech financiers, all informed by Southern African apartheid. So in some ways, it is what comes around, what goes around comes around time and again. And actually, the ideas of the network state and the kind of neo-feudalism. Oh, I'm going. I am not made for this. um, so yes, it is not 1930s fascism, but also it seems very clear to me that we're actually seeing live and in high definition an authoritarian regime aiming in the process of trying to consolidate and entrench its power. It is doing so by attacking systematically and seeking to dismantle civil society institutions that can challenge the regime's reign. And cruelty is not just an accidental byproduct to what is happening, but a deliberate means of actually creating an atmosphere of fear, extorting obedience, and breaking existing solidarities, which have been eroded over years through years of neoliberal policy already. I feel like I can sort of done. Also, what we're seeing is based in Christian nationalism and a certain kind of an apocalyptic Manichaean idea of history that is animating the Trump Vance Musk junta, where we have a sense of good versus evil, us versus them, and which also allows people who buy into that to accept suffering now and cuts and right, unpleasant experiences with the promise of a future victory. It looks very much like what the liberation theologian who for a time worked actually at UTS just down the street, Dorothee Sölle, called Christo-fascism. It's very much an updated version of that. So, and I think there is a value to talking about this moment about fascism where it actually, and I find that very interesting as somebody having grown up in Germany, how fascism codes differently in the US. It is very clear when you ask people that fascism is what in America, we Americans fight Nazis. So there is a moral clarity to using that as a language. It's also interesting that it's much harder for people to say, yes, great Uncle Carl died fighting the Nazis, but I'm going to help them these days. So there's a strategic point. So, okay, but we are here in the middle of the night trying to do what exactly? We're here because this is an emergency. And in an emergency, you stop doing things how you usually do them. We are here because we're saying no business as usual because our board of trustees is refusing to say that for us. Because actually, as the entirety of civil society, we need to come out. We need to stand up now before it is too late. And just because it doesn't feel to all of us that we're an immediate threat, well, actually, I can still sit and have a coffee out on the lawn in the quad. That doesn't mean that this is not urgent, because this is another actually sort of misconception that often lives on, that people think under sort of the everything fascist is always drab and dreary, and their office. And in fact, we have officers working and surveillance cameras everywhere. When they recently discovered actually Super 8 footage from private individuals in Germany during the Nazi period, and what you see is actually very happy families. The families who probably now, well, it was expensive, so these are probably people who did a fair bit of denouncing, but the horrors were, if you push them to the side, they weren't always present. It wasn't this constantly, oh, I will stand when it becomes really, really scary. If we wait for that, it will actually be too late. And so we stand here today because we are fighting for the soul of this university. Because it is, as our students have analyzed so brilliantly, we are in the process of seeing it be bartered away. And sure, we also, part of what we do at universities is also attempting to come up with adequate analyses of our situation in our society at large and how to understand the university. We need, as many colleagues have already explained, we need to come up with better articulations of what university is or should be, what values are not negotiable, and how we want and need it to function. Because if we cannot say what university is, how will we defend it? And we can't just assume that, well, we'll just defend the status quo. It's an institution that also prides itself of, yay, we're great because we reject 96% of people. That seems as M. Gesson wrote recently in the New York Times, quite counter to the very mission of being educators. And just as my colleague Michael Sadeo said, I also don't have the answers. And these are attempts, as I think we're all participating in, attempts to think through, think, ask, discuss, discover limitations in our analyses and errors, and try again. A friend of mine recently said, actually, philosophy taught for 12 years before coming here, and now being a queer theorist in the religion department. I was in a philosophy department. And he said, philosophy is actually about getting it wrong, and getting it wrong over and over, but together with others, getting it wrong a little bit differently, a little bit better, and learning from it. And if sometimes we get things right, it is like, wow, has God come to earth? It is remarkable, but mostly we get it wrong. And this is why we need to think with others. This is why a university is not a single person. So what makes one question that I was asking myself, and not having had the benefit of our brilliant students who gave us the analysis of comparing the commodity model versus the community model, I was wondering what makes a university and not a think tank or an R&D department of a large company. And I think part of what we're discovering right now, as we're having conversations across fields, across schools, across disciplines that usually don't really talk that much to each other, because we're actually also so busy in producing widgets, in whatever widgets form that might come, depends on our disciplines, but we don't talk to each other. What do you do? How does the process in genetics actually work? Oh, here we had to learn in the humanities. Wow, you have to reapply for your grants every year. Wow, who thought it was a good idea to put the entire health sciences on soft money? What kind of proposition was that? But so I think part of, right, there is something interesting to thinking about. University is about a kind of comprehensiveness of having a huge variety of knowledge fields, all united within one institution. And we probably should be doing better in talking across those boundaries, which actually our undergrads already are doing. Sometimes I think of them as they're like, we're like the Tokyo subway system, that was created by letting ants run. How would ants run between these various points? Because when we have the academic resource fair at the beginning of the new school year, it is remarkable when students come up. And so last summer, one student came up and said, do you in religion co-teach classes with biochem? And I thought, wow, that's a combination. Yeah, sure. But tell me why we should. That's not really a combination I had thought of. And the student said, well, but why wouldn't you? Because you're all asking about what are the fundamentals that constitute life. How is life constituted? How does it become meaningful? How do we analyze it? How do we understand it? So how can you not be co-teaching? Or students who come from the climate school are minoring in religion. Why? Because the student told me, well, because I don't think policy making can be the only way that we affect how society changes its ways. And then so I thought, where is a place where people are organizing in collectives? Well, communities of spiritual, religious practice is one of those places, but they work differently. And different arguments will appeal different practices. And if we, as we need to change radically to decarbonize, I should be looking at those places. So it makes good sense. Or a student who's majoring in computer science, but also taking English literature. Why? Well, because you have to think about what exactly cannot be reduced to binary codes and how do you imagine what the gaps are? How do I see them? I can only do that if I expose myself to ways of thinking that really depart from how my discipline thinks. So in fact, our undergraduates are already where we hope to continue to go. And we can only do that because they can study experts in the sciences, in climate science, in computer science, in engineering, in poli-sci, what have you, but then also combine that with other fields. And we need to think about that because, of course, the disciplines that we know, we have inherited from the 19th century European Research University. There's no reason that our disciplines should always be as they are. So comprehensiveness. An R&D department in a pharma company probably doesn't also have, I don't know, complex. Students and education. It seems to me that a think tank usually doesn't have students, it has fellows, and students and being educators, and that whatever we do in research, but also in terms of how we build our institutions, how we govern ourselves, all of these can be translated also into forms of education. In my view, we should be able to translate all three of the legs of research, teaching, service, always into each other. It is also a form of research in terms of how do we need to restructure our universities when we do self-governance. So, and that of course is the third important point. We are one of the few professions where self-governance is actually part of our job description. It is something that sometimes maybe for a little bit long we've said, another committee, and sometimes true, it's a paperclip committee, as people say, right? If we're only deciding should we buy 5 paper clips or 3, and should they be golden or silver, okay, that's not a good committee. But in principle, right, why would we? Why are we hearing that maybe the Senate shouldn't exist? Maybe the Senate shouldn't have discipline, shouldn't have students on there? Because self-governance actually matters. Self-governance is a form of institution building. And so we do that both in terms of the institutions where we work, but also in our disciplines. That is part of what academic freedom means. That we as community of scholars and not the government and not whoever right, owns ChatGPT can decide what counts as good scholarship, what the questions are, and different disciplines do this differently. So academic freedom is one of the things that we absolutely must defend, and that is under assault. And that means, as we also heard earlier, usually we talk about academic freedom as the freedom to teach. The professors, faculty decide what should be taught, but it's also the freedom to learn. So that's when we trace it back to in 1810, the University of Berlin gave itself a code of academic freedom, and it included that students have the right to follow the course of study that they choose. It cannot be dictated by, in that case, the church or the emperor. So students are included in that. And of course, as our colleague from math, Michael Thaddeus, and our AUP co-president already pointed out, we cannot do academic freedom alone. It also requires the freedom of assembly in the sense that we must come together in order to enact academic freedom. So why are universities being attacked? Well, we hear all kinds of, as we also have heard amply, dubious justifications. And as our colleague mentioned earlier, we also have probably not done so the job as we should be doing to explain what universities do and how they can't. We have not always been good neighbors, especially this institution has not exactly been the best of neighbors to Harlem. In fact, right now we're locking our neighbors out who should be part of our community. So, but still, we're right. UPenn lost funding because of one trans athlete who not isn't even there anymore, and this gets sold to us as the Trump administration defending women. Probably not the crowd I'd look to for defense of women. Um, so we get all kinds of dubious justifications for these rancid nodes. Let's try to think, why are universities being attacked? So, well, first of all, freedom of speech in the US is largely conceived of as an individual right. And as I tried to say, universities are one exception here where academic freedom requires collective enactment. It also is the case that in the US, where we live, work, worship, remains highly segregated. And college is the one most diverse living situation that most United States citizens, if they go to college, experience. Also because universities are international, but also because people live door to door with or in the same shared rooms with people who come from drastically different backgrounds. And in a country where 66% of the population have some college, that means that is the place where for 4 years, people actually encounter people from especially different socioeconomic of different. So that is one reason why surely universities are under attack by a regime that wishes to establish a hierarchical ethno-nationalist state. Institutions like Columbia are also participating, let's not kid ourselves about it, in elite reproduction. If you ever sort of had to stand in line and wait because the subway was held up. One fun activity is to actually go to, say, the State Department site and look at sort of the career bureaucrats who are not necessarily the happiest people up, and then look up LinkedIn pages and see where people went to college. Guess what? Like the Ivy League, Columbia, but also right Barnard, our friends, Wellesley, those kinds of the colleges whose names people know from not necessarily watching basketball. I have to say this as somebody who taught for 12 years at Villanova. Go Wildcats. Elite reproduction, right? We're actually this actually matters. Hedge funds, managers, So, and I think we in the humanities in particular, we have kind of bought in for too long into the narrative. Humanities is just hot air. It doesn't really matter. You just read and it's just words and ideas and who cares? It has nothing to do with the real world. It is strange that then that thing that is just inconsequential, hot air, is all that dangerous thing that needs to be undone. As we were told, our radical Marxist, leftist core curriculum. Oh, wish it were. I mean, last I looked also at our business school, it didn't seem like a hotbed of Marxists. Just to, if anybody is worried about that, I think we're not there yet. But right, why are we then so worried about students reading these things that are apparently inconsequential because it's just humanities? It might be that it matters after all if we're suddenly having the top universities or universities across the country. Let's be clear, right? People go on to all kinds of really important work. If everybody reads Angela Davis, it might actually do something to us. So, right, elite reproduction. So yeah, sure, an authoritarian regime will target those schools, universities participating in that. And of course, universities are one site in society where knowledge is not just produced and disseminated, but also the criteria and sensibilities for what counts as legitimate knowledge are being produced and is being embedded in society. And in one way through, of course, the transfer to policies from knowledge creation, in one way also through how we shape our disciplines, but also through students who learn, of course, different ways of making arguments. And of course, we know that that changes. We read, uh, right? We don't write texts the same way as people wrote, let's say, in England in the 16th century. If you made an argument that way, it wouldn't. I don't know. I mean, so legitimacy of knowledge of how ideas of how we should order society is being created and recreated in universities. So higher education and really all of education is under attack because that is how we are being formed into society, how what the limits but also possibilities for imagining how we can do and organize our communities differently is being shaped. So sure, higher education is always on the top of the list of authoritarians for attack, along with the rule of law, voting access and rights, as well as bureaucracy, which a German satirical television show recently called bureaucracy the little sister of democracy. So you can't have your democracy without a functioning bureaucracy in large mass states. So the question of what, right, how do we shape our bureaucratic apparatus? Who is in it? What is their understanding? Their sensibilities, their ability to be politically intelligent, be engaged citizens actually really matters. But as people also have said, one day there will be a day after whatever this is and will be. And that is what brings me back to the question that I asked of my elders, teachers, professors when I was growing up, and that sticks with me. Why we asked we asked our teachers and professors pretty relentlessly often, And I can tell you, it's not really the best for family gatherings when you ask, Grandpa, what did you know about the Nazis and why didn't you do more? Uh, so, yes, and all, this to remember, in Germany, all teachers and professors have tenure because they are state officials. And we know, I know because my mother's grandfather was a biology teacher and he was eventually removed from his teaching post by the Nazis. We didn't really speak about this because that's not real resistance, because it wasn't enough, because we all know what happened, because too many millions of people died. But eventually people do sacrifice. But the most answers that we got when I was a teen was we didn't know how. We didn't know how or what to do against them. Eventually it was too late. Eventually it was too dangerous. So for how we grew up in Germany was not just with never again, which should really mean never again for everyone. And I remember as our students were protesting, I was thinking of how we walked out of school because there was a civil war brewing in Burundi and Rwanda, and it turns out Rwanda was not included in that never again imperative that we were taught. And it felt like, and I think this is what many of our students also felt, it felt like a huge betrayal. The adults we looked up to told us, this is the lesson, your moral compass, but then there are these people who are not included. And so, but next to never again also stands what in German is wehret den Anfängen. So resist when it starts. Resist the beginnings.
Yeah.
So no, we are in the beginning because during the beginning it is not consolidated and we stand a chance. So can we maybe learn something from how not universities in Germany got under Nazi control? Well, there are two parts, basically. Removal of so-called unwanted elements, which meant Jewish and Marxist professors and students. The Marxists are kind of a theme here. And of course, people who have background we don't want. And curtailing self-governance was the other part. So how did that happen? Okay, first from above by decree. So April 7th, 1933, the Nazis passed the so-called law for the restoration of the professional civil service. So like now, the Orwellian theme really runs through. But it couldn't have happened if it hadn't also been taken up from below at the level of the universities. And so as I was looking into that, I actually found somebody who had done some research into this and was quoting from the unpublished memoirs of a botanist named Gerda von Ubisch, or Gerda von Ubisch, probably in English. She was at the University of Heidelberg and was the first woman not only in botany or at that university, but in the entire state of Baden to be allowed to teach at a university in any subject. And she was fired in 1935 on racial grounds, quote unquote. So remember, the law happened in 1933, so it was also piecemeal, right? And she writes in her memoirs. So one asked after the war, one asked oneself How was it possible that the universities did not speak out against this law, that they did not unanimously speak up for their colleagues? If all university professors, doctors, jurists had done this, if all had gone on strike, this law could have never been carried out. There are a number of reasons this did not happen. One was that the timing of the law was skillfully chosen. Over the Easter holiday, in which many instructors who had not been warned were traveling and those returning were presented with a fait accompli. So it was a done deal, right? The timing. So this reminds me of our incredible Senate town hall last Wednesday. For anyone who has not looked into that, please read the spec piece on it. Is quite extraordinary. The time, and one of our colleagues pointed out that the timing of revising the Senate governance is very conspicuous to choose to do so over the summer break. We know that most students are gone during that time, and also lots of faculty are traveling for research. But we should keep in mind, numbers here at Columbia. We have, including contingent faculty, around 5,000 faculty. We have 37,000 students. So if we're doing something that will most likely also very much affect how much say students have, the timing is very conspicuous here. So similarly here, choosing to implement a law over a holiday, and then when people come back, actually a lot of shifts have already happened on the ground. Secondly, as Gerta Ubisch writes, it did not, the law did not affect so many full professors. Oh, lo and behold, because actually the president, Hitler, was chancellor at the time, the president was Hindenburg. He actually pleaded for limiting it so that people who had, those professors who had served in the First World War would be exempted. That would be the full professors. But it affected, as Ubisch writes, nearly all young teachers who had not taken part in the war because of caste conceit and the sharp borders that existed between the full professors and non-full professors. The full professors were not that interested in the not full professors. And then the third reason was that in their heart of hearts, many Germans were anti-Semites, and each one had more or less some Jews among their acquaintances, but there were many among the university professors who found that there were just too many Jews among the instructors, was what Gerta Ubisch writes. So what happened from below, right, is also what she doesn't point out, but which is now very well documented, is that also we had very militant Nazi student groups with leaders who were bent on purging the university of quote unquote non-Aryans and Marxists, and were pressuring the university administration. The professors were, yeah, mostly at the level of departments and faculty acquiescing, silent, hoping that they would not be affected themselves, and also in agreement with several of the basic plans for the university, namely that there were a lot of anti-Semites in Germany, and there are still too many. So because they were actually not in disagreement with the plans, they tolerated what was mostly less pleasant to them, the loutishness, as they often called it, in how it was being implemented, and that was how German universities were taken over. A lot of it happened at the level of the university itself. And of course, eventually it also became a worry that speaking up would make one a target, not because there were surveillance cameras everywhere, but it is important to remember that the majority of the Gestapo, the secret state police in Nazi Germany, investigations were opened because of denunciations from within the population, community, neighbors, denouncing neighbors, which is why it's not terribly pleasant when the kids ask at the family gathering, what did you do? And this is also what we suspected, that those are the stories that people aren't telling. So how do we approach then the question of opposing an assault on our institutions under increasingly difficult conditions, not just in the institution, but also in society at large? And one place where I look to, and I know our political science colleagues already also, among others, spoke about her, is Hannah Arendt, who actually, I think, lived somewhere on Riverside Drive in 96th, I believe. She wrote an essay after the war on personal responsibility under dictatorship. And it contains a couple very interesting and useful points to think, I think, to keep in mind. So one thing, and she also says this in one of the interviews she gave on German television, which is worth seeing, in part also because she absolutely urgently needs to make a point while she is lighting a cigarette and it is sitting in her mouth, and she says, "Yes, um, but she points out in this essay as well as in the interview that what was really disconcerting was not, and she says it was disconcerting not how our enemies, the Nazis, behaved toward us, behaved in general. We knew they were our enemies. They hated Jews. They hated us as Jews." She says, "What is disturbing was really the ease with which lifelong friendships were broken and discarded, and friends simply jumped on the Nazi bandwagon." And that was surprising, startling, and hard to understand. So, and not to draw parallels, but I think that's something to reckon with. That what pains us probably most, or we heard here right now, is that, as we heard earlier from the statement that was being read, that the ransom note that was sent to Columbia University contains language that came from our community. That's painful. So back to Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt points out it is really important to notice the beginning stages of the regime, because at that point, of course, and to keep in mind that the regime takes actions in order to instill fear and stifle opposition. So the cruelty on display, and I'm thinking of the ICE agents abducting Ozturk in the open street, or the video of Mahmoud, or the video of Mohsen when they were being taken. That cruelty, and the fact to choose to do this in broad daylight, that's not an accident. That is an intention to instill fear, to drive us away. And this is why we're out here, and I don't know, is it 4 a.m.? In the middle of the night, And we are the university. We are taking the space. So the other part that Arendt says is it is programmed to create a sense of there's no alternative but to tolerate and arrange oneself in the context of this criminality of the government. And one gets used over time to those acts and just hopes that they don't draw too close to one. So the time to act is now. And then she continues and says, actually, rather than thinking about, right, here's the real place where resistance starts is in the refusal to participate. So the question that one should ask oneself, and I'll read the quote here from her, is to what extent would one still be able to live in peace with oneself after having committed certain deeds? So, a student, when I wrote a note, actually, I have this. Oh, thank you. One student, I didn't think the email I wrote was particularly courageous or anything to stand out, but it was interesting because the student asked, how did you get the courage to write this email? And it is true. I think most of us think twice these days when we say something, when we do something. How do we put it? Maybe I didn't formulate those felicitatively. Will this have consequences? And I did wonder because I thought, oh, I'm sending it through courseworks, which of course is visible to anyone in administration, can see everything that we do through courseworks. They can see how often which student logs on. I mean, it's a remarkable surveillance tool. And for a moment, I thought, is this wise? And then I thought, yes, but one day, people will look back. And do I want to be the person who, when there wasn't anyone who had said, if you write this email, if you say the name Mahmoud Khalil in your email, you will be fired from the university. There is no such decree. Of course, we know of colleagues who are being investigated. We have a colleague in the law school who was, Catherine Franke, was forced to retire. I mean, things are happening, but there's no direct immediate sanction. And so I told the student, I thought of Hannah Arendt saying, oh, will you still be able to live with yourself knowing that, in this case, not committed, but I omitted to do that without without immediate pressure. And if we don't practice small acts of overcoming these fears, the moment when it becomes more difficult, we will not be ready. Finally, the question that Arendt says is the political question that matters is not why did you obey, since I think most of us know that the Germans always said, like, oh, I was disobeying orders. And she said, that's not politically relevant. That's not a political question, generally. It's not, do I obey? Don't I obey? Kids obey. Politically, the question is, why did you support? Do I support? And if we don't support, how do we withhold our support? So every time when we stop at a red stoplight, what we do is we support actually that this is a good idea of how to organize our traffic because it makes it a little safer, a little easier, it manages it well. But this is also why, for instance, when on lawns in public parks, there were little signs with children and dogs not permitted on the lawn. I remember my mother saying, well, that's not a good rule. Sometimes the grass needs to grow and regenerate, then yes, you shouldn't step on it. But out of principle, children and dogs not permitted on the lawn is not a good rule. So you go and play. You break bad law. You break it. It's human law. You can also do this theologically. So I don't know. Sometimes we read Thomas Aquinas, who has a lot to say on law. Human law is fallible, and we need to check it and evaluate it. And when it's bad law, we need to abolish it. Right? Boyd v. Brown. I mean, sometimes law is fallible. So the political question is, if we don't support, how do we withdraw our consent? When we remain silent, that means we're giving implicitly our consent. And this is why we are speaking out, and we're purposefully not being silent. And purposefully, it is so unusual. We do need to speak for 25 hours, and that we do need to be awake. And I am absolutely stunned by my colleagues from social work who seem superhuman because they have been up now since noon yesterday, and they are still out here standing up. It is remarkable. These are the pillars of the university, really. So, but is it often scary? Might it be costly? Sure. Yes. Yes. Because we live in a time and place where dissent and refusal to support what is happening is costly. That's what many of our students have seen. That's not just Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Madawi who've still been denied due process, but also many of our students who protested, who spoke out, who demand. Students are allowed to demand of their university, regardless of what we think of their proposals. I happen to think that it would be a good idea not to be invested in weapons manufacturing as a university, but our students are allowed to protest, but many of them have paid very dearly for it. So yes, yes, these are scary times. And yes, we all deserve to live in societies where nobody has to be a saint in order to stop against government action, to ask that we do things differently in our community. We shouldn't have to be saints or heroes. We should be humans. That is, I think, the idea of democracy. And when it becomes such that it feels like one must be a hero to stand up, things are already very, very wrong. And sorry, did I turn it off? I might have turned it, no, it's still working, right? Okay. Yeah. It's actually getting warmer again. Just your mic a little bit. Awesome. Do I have time? Oh yes. I mean, I love this. This is why I told. people who know me were like, "Oh, your colleagues don't know what they're getting into." Them into this. So I wanted
47 hours.
oh, right. This is kind of what we do as professors, isn't it? Like, we're gonna keep this going. Cory Booker couldn't, but we'll hold the space. So I wanted also, since earlier Michael Fadeas was speaking about violence and how we talk about violence, what counts as violence, what is violence, what is it not, what is visible sometimes doesn't look like violence, where does it start, where does it how does it go? So I wanted to read a poem by an Austrian-born Jewish poet called Erich Fried. It's called Die Gewalt, Violence. And I'm not a professional translator like some of our brilliant colleagues. So even though it says individual from the arts, thank you for giving me that title. I don't think I can claim it, but so here's Fried. Violence does not start when someone strangulates someone else. Violence starts when someone says, "I love you and you belong to me." Violence does not start when the sick are being killed. Violence starts when someone says, "You're sick and you must do as I say." Violence starts when parents dominate their obedient children, and when popes and teachers and parents self-control. Violence reigns when wherever the state says, to fight against violence, there shall be no other violence except for my violence. Violence reigns wherever anyone or anything is too high or too holy to be criticized, or wherever criticism isn't allowed to do anything except speaking, and those up high are allowed to do more than speak. Violence reigns when we are told you are allowed to use violence, but also often when we are told you're not allowed to use violence. Violence reigns where it imprisons its opponents and where it denounces its opponents then as instigators of violence. This is the basic law of violence. Right is what we do, and what the others are doing, that is violence. Violence can maybe never be overcome by means of violence, but maybe violence can also not always be overcome without violence. So that I also, since we're in the poetry section, before I ran Columbia's. This is sort of the fun part will come. I ran Columbia's mission statement through ChatGPT and let ChatGPT give us feedback on it. Coming up after the next segment, I also wanted to take the opportunity and read a poem by Polly Murray, who was a remarkable and I think in some ways often forgotten feminist and local Harlem hero. She was, or they, Polly Murray was a lawyer, argued, actually, in some ways, made an argument for intersectionality before we had Kimberly Crenshaw articulate the concept. Polly Murray also sought hormone treatment throughout, was eventually was investigated by the FBI for just being too radical, and became the first Black women to be ordained an Episcopal priest, and actually is that counts as the one transgender saint in the Episcopal Church. And Polly Murray was also a poet. So here's Polly Murray. To the oppressors, now you are strong, and we are but grapes aching with ripeness. Crush us, squeeze from us all the brave life contained in these full skins, but ours is a subtle strength, potent with centuries of yearning of being begged, kegged, and shut away in dark, forgotten places. We shall endure to steal your senses, and in that lonely twilight of your winter's grief. And it made me think about how the US is a complicated country, but it also is a country, yes, where fascism is not something that is imported from the outside, but it is also a country that contains communities that have known how to resist and survive genocidal violence for over 500 years. And it is it's it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we support the stewards of those knowledges and learn from them and with them, because that too is what this country has, and we not only owe it to them, but also we might just learn a thing or two from them. So when we defend the university, one thing that seemed to me that was remarkable about one of the statements that we got from one of the rotating cast of characters of presidents in the recent years was that it contained a sentence of, we stand and we stand strong with our values, and we will adhere to them, and finally we will emerge from this. And it seemed to me like that was a very Kafkaesque formulation. Like, there are values, and at one time someone in the university knew what they were and how to stand on them, but no, unfortunately nobody anymore knew who the last person was who knew these values. And so they stood watching over College Walk, seeing the sunset, and they were sure you are created for a beautiful, liberated Monday. Unfortunately, it'll always be Sunday. So we must know what our values are on which we stand. And I think we get very clear articulations that our friends and colleagues from CU-MC already pointed out to us: academic freedom, institutional integrity and autonomy, which includes self-governance, the authority to review programs that scholars have and not outside governments or powers, donors. We have control over admissions and hiring, as well as discipline. Nobody likes to do discipline. Last year in the spring, I'm not really an archives person. I admire people who do archival work. I'm sort of a text and read and think line of work, but I was curious, where did this thing, this CSSI, very Orwellian, I think, what is it, Center for Student Success and Intervention, which actually is a discipline, student discipline. Yes, Newspeak. Where did that come from? How did that, and people called it Dean's discipline. How did we end up with this thing. And it turned out 6 it broke down. It continues to break. And then we say, but we have a long history. I think we're saying this because we hope that one day we will have had a long history. We'll need to fight for it. So in this also was after the Senate was created discipline procedures. Hey, we make sure that there's more standardized discipline across the field. So they wrote out, notes to all the